We last spoke almost 2 years ago now. What have you learned in those last 2 years that has evolved your own thinking or has developed your own thinking in any way? If we reflect on the last conversations we had around glucose spikes and sugar and the health consequences and diets, is there anything you've learned in those 2 years that is interesting and new?
Oh, absolutely. I think mostly the impact of glucose on mood and on relationships. For example, there's this fascinating study that took married couples and they gave the husband and the wives a little voodoo doll representing their spouse. And the researchers told the participants to put a little pin in the voodoo doll every time their spouse annoyed them. At the end of the 2 weeks, the researchers counted the number of pins in the voodoo dolls, and they also measured the participants' glucose levels. They found that the people who had the most glucose lows had put the most pins in the voodoo doll representing their spouse.
Wow.
So it's just an association, but it's interesting. And scientists then found that when you have very unsteady glucose levels, it impacts this neurotransmitter in your brain called tyrosine that manages your mood. So it seems that with unsteady glucose levels, your mood is less stable, which could then correlate to you being more annoyed at your spouse. So I think studies like this have really blown my mind.
What's going on when we go through a glucose crash per se?
So glucose is your body's energy. So your brain is constantly monitoring how much glucose do we have in our bloodstream. And steady glucose is great. When your glucose levels crash, this indicates biologically that you're out of fuel. And this is a powerful signal to your body and your brain to say, alert, alert, we need food, we need more glucose. And so it creates all these downstream consequences on your mood. You become hangry. All you think about is food. You're in a bad mood. You're like, I need to eat something. You look for a banana, you look for a cookie. It can also activate the craving center in your brain that says, Stephen, go find some chocolate. And science has shown this. Low glucose levels creates a cascade of consequences on how we feel and what we seek. Now, what's interesting is that back in the day, when we had low glucose levels, I'm talking like hunter-gatherer times, they wouldn't arrive so quickly because we didn't have these big spikes that then led to these big drastic drops. It was more, we ate in a more balanced way with less sugar, obviously. So when our glucose became low, it was a bit more gradual. Today, because we have access to all this sugar, we can spike our glucose very quickly, and as a result, it then crashes very quickly. So the effects are pretty much immediate, and they're very intense. All of a sudden, you go from feeling okay to your brain being in alert mode, we need to find more fuel. So we've dysregulated our glucose levels to the point where it's impacting us in a very unnatural way.
Is that in part because we modify our food, even fruit? When I looked back through the history of fruit, apples, bananas, etc., looked extremely different before they were modified to be juicier and sweeter, etc.
Completely. It's like dogs. So all the dog breeds today, from Chihuahuas to Golden Retrievers, they all come from wolves. Humans have been breeding wolves together to create these different species of dogs. They all have that ancestor of the gray wolf. So humans are very good at breeding natural things to serve their purposes. And when it comes to fruit, it's the same thing. So as you say, if you compare like an ancestral banana or an ancestral apple to a modern one, they look completely different. And you should pull up these photos. They're fascinating. Ancestral banana, tiny, full of fiber, full of seeds, not very sweet. And then modern banana, full of sugar, low in fiber, really easy to eat. So that's the first thing people need to know about fruit. Fruit is not natural. Fruit is the product of human engineering. However, a piece of whole fruit also contains fiber and water. So even though it's been bred to have a lot of sugar, the fiber and the water reduce how quickly the sugar arrives in our bloodstream, making it more or less okay for us. But the problem comes when we denature that piece of fruit, meaning if we remove the fiber. For example, if we take an orange and make an orange juice, what are we actually talking about here? Actually, oranges are not even a natural fruit. They were invented thousands of years ago by crossing other species of fruit. To make an orange juice, you throw away part of the orange. You throw away the solid part, which is the fiber. So you're left with the sugar of a very sugary fruit, water, and no fiber. As a result, you're getting a very unnatural amount of sugar in your bloodstream with no fiber to protect the spike. So a big, big glucose spike. And people often say, oh, well, fruit has vitamins in it, so therefore orange juice must be better for you than Coca-Cola. That's actually a total myth. If you compare a glass of orange juice to a glass of Coca-Cola, it's the same amount of sugar, about 25 grams. And the sugar in the can of Coke and the sugar in the glass of orange juice, they're exactly the same. They're glucose and fructose molecules, and your body absorbs them in the exact same way. Your body does not make a difference between sugar from an orange and sugar from a sugar beet that's now in a can of Coca-Cola. I hope that orange juice disappears from school lunches, from hospital meals. The World Health Organization recommends 25 grams of sugar per day or less. So with just one glass of orange juice in the morning that you squeeze at home that you think is good for you, you're already at the maximum limit of sugar recommendation. And most people drink this glass of orange juice thinking it's good for them. Most people with diabetes drink this glass of orange juice thinking it's helping them with their condition. And that's really where I want to act. I want to help people understand what they actually need to do to feel better so they don't fall victim to marketing.
We talked there about glucose crashes and what that causes in terms of behavior. I was wondering if it also causes other compulsive behaviors. Does it make me more likely to want to doom scroll on the internet if I have been eating lots of sugar?
Well, that's a great question. Why does sugar feel good? Because it releases dopamine in our brain. Dopamine is the pleasure molecule. It makes us feel good. So if I were to drink this glass of orange juice, which you would have to pay me a lot of money for me to drink this, but my brain would let out so many dopamine molecules and I would feel this wave of pleasure. Now, the problem is people confuse that with energy. It's not energy, it's dopamine. And dopamine is the same exact molecule that gets released when you're scrolling on Instagram. You look for the next post, you look for the next video. Every time you get something new and interesting, bam, a dopamine signal as well in your brain. So if you're constantly triggering dopamine in your brain, you're going to constantly crash. You're going to have dopamine spikes, dopamine crashes, and become more and more addicted to it. So I don't know about studies showing glucose spikes and, for example, doom scrolling. But if you look at just the biology of it, they're triggering the same center in your brain. So for sure, I can imagine that if you are on a dopamine binging or dopamine addiction cycle, both an orange juice and a glucose spike and doom scrolling can go hand in hand.
I was just looking at some research here and it says, yes, you're significantly more likely to doom scroll during a glucose crash. And it explains that that's because of something called the energy crisis in the prefrontal cortex, where your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for willpower and decision-making and saying no to things like doom scrolling. In the case where glucose drops, this area is first to dim the lights to save energy for vital functions. The result is you lose your executive function, making it nearly impossible to resist the hit of dopamine that social media provides. But it also says the second reason is this dopamine trap. And the third is generally your emotional regulation goes out of the window. I think this in part because I notice in myself that when I am on a higher glucose diet, I'm more likely to get involved in like compulsive behaviors that I otherwise don't like.
Yeah.
Like doom scrolling on the internet.
You have less willpower, less control.
Yeah, I have less willpower.
You feel more addicted.
Yeah. Like I have less control over my life.
And the first thing that people notice is that when they are on a glucose roller coaster, they feel addicted to sugar. Like it's no longer a choice to go after that cookie. It feels like a compulsive behavior, like I need sugar right now because that glucose crash is triggering a biological mechanism that is nearly impossible to override. So when you tell somebody, just eat less sugar, that's BS. You can't just eat less sugar. You have to go fix the underlying cause, which is usually the glucose crash. You can't override that feeling of craving that comes from deep inside your brain when you have a glucose crash. You need to fix the spike, reduce the spike, and then naturally the spike also reduces and you feel fewer cravings. There's this theory called the protein leverage hypothesis. And this theory says that your body will keep you hungry and keep you seeking food until you've given it enough protein. So if in the morning you have, some oats and toast and jam, very little protein, your body's going to be like, okay, we didn't get any protein. We need to get more protein. So you stay more and more hungry. At 10 a.m., you're hungry again. If you have a cookie, again, no protein. Your body will keep you hungry. If all of a sudden you have 40 grams of protein, then that craving dissipates. And that feeling of seeking out food sort of calms down because your body got what he actually needed, which was protein.
People send you lots of messages. You have an enormous online following. If I was to peer into those DMs you get, what would be the essence of what people are saying to you?
They're asking me about specific foods. They're saying, are lentils okay? Can I eat 3 eggs a day? What kind of vinegar should I use? And often it's people trying to navigate the marketing messages they're seeing on the packaging of things. They'll be like, this can of tea that says 0 grams of sugar, is it good for me? They're trying to decode what these food products actually contain and whether they're actually good for them.
And is there any real standout marketing messages that are deceptive?
Yeah. No added sugars. That is so deceptive because this glass of orange juice has no added sugars in it because the sugar was there at the beginning. It came from the orange, from the original ingredient. So on a can of orange juice, you can say no added sugar, even though it contains 25 grams of sugar, which is the maximum limit the WHO recommends for your daily sugar intake. So that's a really, really bad one. Another one would be something that says gluten-free or vegan. It's not because it's gluten-free or vegan that it's good for you, but we're being tricked. Food manufacturers do everything they can to make you buy their products.
I think I'm in the season of life where I'm thinking a lot about fertility, both my fertility, my fiance's fertility, and how my diet, the things I eat, has an impact on that. What is it we need to know about, if we're trying to conceive, if we want to have a family, is it really the case that I need to start thinking about my own fertility in the lead up to putting that sperm into that egg?
Yes, both the males and the females need to be thinking about fertility. And nutrition plays a big role, and health plays a big role in the quality of your sperm, for example. So a good idea would be to reduce, before you want to have a kid, if you're the man, reduce alcohol, exercise more, eat better so that your sperm are high quality. So the sperm turnover is about 3 months. So if you do like a 3-month sort of intense, my sperm are getting in shape kind of situation, it's a good idea. For women, it's different. So our eggs are present from before we're born, but the quality of our diet, of our nutrient reserves, is going to impact our ability to have kids also, and is going to impact what our baby gets in the first trimester of pregnancy.
You've just given birth?
8 months ago, yeah. Feels like just last week, but yeah, 8 months ago.
And I guess that's somewhat linked to why you've written this new book, which is titled 9 Months That Count Forever: How Your Pregnancy Diet Shapes Your Baby's Future. You could have written about anything, Jessie, and people would have bought the book because people are so fascinated by you and the work that you do. Why, of all the subjects you could have written about, was this the subject that meant the most to you to commit a long period of your life to?
Because it is a subject where there's such a big gap, Stephen, between what science knows and what parents are told. It felt like there was a just canyon between information in the studies that's been there for decades and what I, as a pregnant woman, went through and what advice I was given, what's available out there to pregnant moms. So even though I was pregnant and I was tired, I felt I need to write this book because people need to know the power that they have. So today, science knows that you're not just an oven when you're pregnant. Have you heard this thing, being a bun in the oven? It's an American expression.
I think I've heard it once or twice, yeah.
Okay, so often if you're pregnant, people will say, oh, you have a bun in the oven.
Yeah.
That's so cute. It's like an expression. And I feel like this is where all of our problems started because it implies so many misleading things. It implies that when you're pregnant, you are an oven, meaning you're just there to provide heat and time. And people often say, just relax, let nature do its thing. So it implies that you're passive, that you have no agency, no power. You're just a vessel of heat and time. That's the first problem. The second problem is that it implies that just like a chocolate cake that you put in the oven, it implies that your baby, the moment the sperm meets the egg, your baby is set in stone. Like if you're making a cake, when you make the brownie and you put it in the oven is not going to change the brownie into banana bread. The oven is just cooking the brownie. Well, actually, it's very different with pregnancy. Your baby is not set in stone at conception. What happens during the 9 months of pregnancy is co-creating your baby's plan. And depending on what you eat, a different baby will come out. So we've been lying to pregnant moms, telling them they have no agency, they have no power, they should just relax and let nature do its thing. So that's why I wrote this book, because the science is fascinating.
So where are pregnant women being let down in this regard? Is it that there's just not enough information out there? Is there's not been enough research out there? Is it bad advice currently on the internet?
This is the fault of our food system. This is the fault of society. This is the fault of the food industry that we were just talking about, the marketing messages. For everybody today in developed countries, we are being fed processed, unhealthy foods that are hurting us. Whether we get diabetes or heart disease, there's a link to food. And today, even pregnant moms are being let down by the food system and are eating a diet without knowing it that's not giving them the nutrients their baby needs. So the moment I became pregnant the first time, I started researching. I went to Google Scholar and I just opened about 1,000 tabs on my computer, which is usually what I do when I'm researching a new topic. And I looked at the big review studies, the meta-analyses of how nutrition during pregnancy impacts our baby's development. I read probably 2,000 scientific papers. And I just went deep, deep, deep into the research. And out of it, I I saw these 4 big themes coming out of these 4 nutrients that most moms are not getting enough of in their diet or too much of in their diet. And I wanted to create this guide to help parents navigate that food system and see easy things they can do in the mom's diet to help their baby's development. So while your baby's DNA is set the moment the sperm meets the egg, with your diet during pregnancy, you're programming that DNA. Have you heard of epigenetics?
Yes.
Okay. So epigenetics are like these little dimmer switches that sit on your DNA and that say, activate this gene or silence this gene. And so during pregnancy, you're putting these little switches on your baby's DNA, and this is going to have an impact on your baby's development and on his future risk of disease. I'll give you a very simple example. If you have very high glucose levels during pregnancy, scientists have found that your baby's DNA will have epigenetic switches that are programming him towards having a higher vulnerability to develop diabetes himself in his lifetime. So if you have high glucose levels, your baby will be programmed to be more likely to then have high glucose levels himself throughout his life, as a kid, a teenager, and an adult. That's epigenetic programming. And depending on your diet as the mom, you can program your kids differently. But nobody tells moms about this, and that's what I'm trying to change.
What do I need to know as someone that knows very little about pregnancy to really understand the basics of what's going on? What time frame matters? What happens when?
So females have a uterus, which is an organ, and the uterus is where the baby develops. And the uterus grows as pregnancy progresses. And then when you give birth, the baby comes out of the uterus, and the uterus stays in the mom. So that's important. When conception happens, so you have the sperm meets the egg, that little packet of cells will implant in one of the walls of the uterus and start growing. And pregnancy is divided into 3 trimesters. It's about 9 months. So months 1 to 3 is the first trimester, 4, 5, 6 is the second trimester, 7, 8, 9 is the third trimester. And what we're going to talk about today is about nutrition and how your baby's getting the building blocks that he needs to develop in your womb as the female. Because your baby needs to grow from a single cell to 40 trillion cells by the time he's born, right? He grows from nothing to 3 or 4 kilos. And that has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just come out of thin air. All those building blocks, all that matter is coming from you, from what you're eating. What you eat becomes your baby. So your baby is what you eat. In the first trimester, your baby's getting food from this sort of milk that your uterus creates. So it's uterine secretions. And then from the second trimester onwards, something incredible happens.
When's the second trimester?
It starts at 4 months.
Okay.
And so for the second and third trimesters, there's another organ that you create inside your uterus. It's called the placenta. And the placenta's job is to bring your baby's bloodstream and your bloodstream as the mom in really close contact. And all of a sudden, symbiosis is established. And your bloodstream and your baby's bloodstream are then going to exchange nutrients and waste. So your baby's going to get all his nutrition directly from your bloodstream. And Stephen, here's a main myth that people believe. They believe that your baby will just get what he needs from you during pregnancy. That's something moms are told. Don't worry, your baby will get what he needs from you. This is a lie. Depending on what you eat, your baby will have different access to important nutrients. So your baby doesn't get what he needs, he gets what's there and what you give him. So let's take a simple example. One of the nutrients that is really important is called choline. Have you heard about choline before?
Is that in eggs?
Yes, exactly. It's in the egg yolk. So choline is super important. It forms your baby's brain in the womb. So your baby's brain has these cells that are forming called neurons, which are the ones that process information. And choline is important to creating those neurons. And choline creates the parts of your baby's brain that have to do with memory, learning, and attention. So that egg that you're holding contains about 125 milligrams of choline. And it's an incredible, incredible substance. The thing is, if you don't eat enough choline, your baby's brain is not going to get enough choline. And this can have an impact on the development of your child. So much so that the American Association of Pediatrics says failure to provide choline during this time can result in lifelong brain deficits in the baby. Today, 90% of moms are not getting enough choline during pregnancy. 90% of moms are not getting enough choline during pregnancy.
Why?
Because nobody's telling them about it. And because today we don't eat very nutritious foods anymore that contain a lot of choline. They're present in eggs. So 4 eggs a day gives you all the choline that you need. But choline is also present in organ meats, like liver. Nobody eats liver anymore. Most of the foods that we eat today, cupcakes, dried fruits, burgers, chips, they don't contain a lot of choline. We need to be eating eggs. This is the simplest way to give enough choline to our baby. And scientists do these animal studies where they deprive moms from choline and they look at the impact on the brain, and they see that brain development in the baby stops earlier than it should, and those babies are born with fewer neurons. The amount of choline in your diet during pregnancy is going to be impacting your child's brain development. And nobody's telling moms about this. It's really messed up.
So how many eggs a day do I need to eat while I'm pregnant to get enough choline?
4 is the golden number. So here I think we have 28 eggs. So every day during pregnancy, I ate 4 eggs. So this is the amount of eggs that I ate per week during the 9 months of pregnancy. That's a lot of eggs. But as I was doing this, I knew I was giving my baby all the choline that he needed, which is about 450 milligrams per day. And this is not very expensive. 28 eggs is about $7. So for $1 a day, you're getting all the choline that your baby needs to form his brain.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.